My sister-in-law, Brenda, was 5 months pregnant, but the bigger her belly got, the thinner the rest of her became. Everyone in my family called it a miracle. They said she was carrying a big, healthy boy. I knew better. One night I saw a pale, slimy head push out from under her nightgown, then another inch of white body, then another. It wasn't a baby making her stomach move. It was a tapeworm. In my last life, I screamed. I dragged Brenda to the ER, where doctors pulled a worm nearly 3 feet long from her body. She lost the baby, and somehow that became my fault. My parents said I'd killed their grandson. My brother Kevin and Brenda said I'd cursed their son into a worm. Then they held me down and tried to force the parasite into my mouth. By the time the smaller worms hatched and began tearing through me from the inside, I was locked in my room, begging for help. No one opened the door. I died listening to them tell me I deserved it. So when I opened my eyes and found myself back on the exact same night, staring at that same white worm wriggling out from under Brenda's nightgown, I didn't scream. I smiled. Then I quietly closed the bedroom door. If they wanted their precious son that badly, who was I to interfere? I had barely turned around when I saw Mom standing in the living room. For one terrible second, I thought she'd seen the worm, too. What are you doing up? She snapped. Why aren't you asleep? Instead of creeping around like a thief. I forced my face into a harmless smile. Kevin's door was open. I didn't want Brenda or the baby getting cold, so I closed it. Mom's expression softened by half an inch. Good. At least you're useful for something. She went back to her room. Only then did I breathe again, returned to my tiny bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed, my hands still trembling. Brenda had always loved sushi. Pregnancy only made it worse. She could finish an entire platter of raw seafood by herself and still complain she was hungry. At first, everyone praised her appetite, but the more she ate, the stranger she looked. Her cheeks hollowed out, her wrists became thin, and her collarbone stuck out sharply. Only her stomach kept growing. In my last life, I had been stupid enough to care. Brenda, I'd said carefully, maybe you should get checked. Losing this much weight while your stomach keeps growing doesn't seem normal. She exploded. So now you're jealous because I'm carrying a healthy boy? Mom immediately joined in. Why do you always have to say unlucky things? Brenda is pregnant. Stop cursing my grandson. Then she demanded $50 from me so Brenda could order more sushi. A few nights later, I saw the worm. I panicked, rushed Brenda to the hospital. And thought I'd saved her life. Instead, I destroyed mine. The doctors removed the parasite, but Brenda miscarried. Kevin screamed that my big mouth had turned his son into a worm. Dad called me a murderer. Mom held the parasite in front of my face and shouted, "You killed my grandson so you can eat him." I remembered fighting until my throat went raw. I remembered the worms inside me. I remembered begging them to call an ambulance. They locked my bedroom door. By morning, I was dead. I lay back on my pillow and stared at the ceiling. Not this time. This time, Brenda could keep her miracle. The next morning, Brenda was already at the table with a mountain of sushi in front of her. She was only 5 months pregnant, but her stomach looked almost full term. Her face was pale and narrow, her arms no thicker than sticks. Still, she ate like she'd been starved. Piece after piece disappeared into her mouth, raw fish, octopus, shrimp. The sight of it nearly made me gag. Brenda noticed me watching. What? She snapped, jealous because my baby has a good appetite? Before I could answer, Mom rushed out of the kitchen. Don't you dare upset her. Her palm cracked across my cheek. You want something to happen to my grandson? Get on your knees and apologize. Dad looked disgusted with me. Kevin stared like he wanted to throw me out of the house. Brenda rested both hands over her huge belly and watched smugly. In my last life, I would have tried to defend myself. This time, I smiled. You're all misunderstanding me. I think Brenda looks great. I used to worry too much, but I get it now. Sushi is nutritious. Brenda is eating well and the baby is obviously growing fast. And his chin lifted. Exactly. I looked at the empty platter. Honestly, it smells so good, I almost want some myself. Her smile disappeared. She pulled the plate toward her. There's barely enough for my baby. Get your own. Mom immediately kicked my ankle. Don't touch your nephew's food. Kevin sneered. You don't contribute anything and you're already trying to steal from my son. Maybe we should just marry you off and use the bride money to feed him. I nearly laughed. I was the only person in the house with a steady income. Kevin had been unemployed for months. But I didn't argue. Instead, I lowered my eyes and said, I would never take food away from my nephew. Actually, a friend of mine just opened a sushi place. I already ordered a huge batch for Brenda. Every face in the room changed. Mom's anger vanished. Kevin's eyes lit up. Even Dad sat straighter. Brenda leaned forward eagerly. How much? A lot. When are you getting it? Today. Mom immediately took the broom from my hand. Then why are you still standing here? Go. I'll handle the chores. I smiled. I spent the rest of the day collecting cheap sushi from several stores and arranging for more to be delivered. By the time I got home, it was dark. Mom opened the door, already yelling, what took you so long? Starving? Do you even care about your nephew? Then she saw the cart behind me. Her mouth shut. Boxes were stacked from top to bottom. Brenda pushed past her. Is all of that mine? I bought enough for everyone. For a second, nobody moved. Then Kevin ripped open the first box. Dad grabbed a piece. Brenda reached in with both hands. Mom shoved her way to the table. Within minutes, they were eating like they'd never seen food before. This is incredible, Kevin mumbled through a full mouth. No wonder my son loves this stuff. Brenda laughed and rubbed her stomach. He has expensive taste. Mom pointed at the remaining boxes. Joy, don't just stand there. Open the rest. I obeyed. Box after box went onto the table. I didn't touch a single piece. Eventually, Mom noticed. Why aren't you eating? I gave her the sweetest smile I could manage. There's only so much. The best food should go to my parents, my brother, Brenda, and the baby. Mom looked pleased. At least you finally learned some sense. Then she went back to eating. I watched them wipe soy sauce and fish oil from their mouths. I knew what was hidden inside that bargain sushi. Tiny things. No one at the table bothered looking for. I lowered my gaze so they wouldn't see me smile. Eat, please. Eat as much as you want. After all, this family loved sons more than anything. Maybe this time everyone could have one. From that day on, sushi became a regular meal in our house. Brenda's appetite doubled, then doubled again. Her stomach became enormous, but her face looked almost skeletal. She was thrilled. My baby is going to be huge, she bragged one afternoon, rubbing the moving bulge beneath her dress. I felt him kicking. All night, I stared at the shifting shape under her skin. It wasn't kicking. And she wasn't the only one changing. Kevin's stomach started swelling, then Dad's. Even Mom developed a round, hard belly beneath her clothes. They blamed it on overeating. I encouraged them. Of course you're gaining weight. You've all been eating so well lately. Kevin laughed and patted his stomach. Dad started loosening his belt after every meal. Mom, however, kept getting bigger. One afternoon, I stared at her belly and widened my eyes. Are you pregnant? The entire room went silent. Mom touched her stomach. What? I gasped dramatically. Look at you. What if I'm finally getting a little brother? Her face transformed. A boy. Dad stared at her belly, then straightened proudly. At my age, Mom laughed until her eyes watered. We're having another son. For the first time in weeks, Brenda stopped smiling. Kevin's face went stiff. He always assumed everything Mom and Dad owned would eventually belong to Kevin. If another son appeared, that meant another heir. Suddenly, Brenda's pregnancy wasn't the only miracle in the house, and she hated it. Fights started almost immediately. Mom, who used to serve Brenda first at every meal, began watching how much sushi she took. Leave some for me. I have a baby to feed, too. Brenda slammed her chopsticks down. You're not pregnant. You're just fat. Mom nearly flipped the table. Kevin jumped in to defend Brenda. Dad defended Mom. Within days, the house turned into a battlefield. Every meal ended in screaming. Every swollen stomach became a competition. Every strange movement beneath their skin was proudly described as a kick. Whenever they needed someone to blame, they still blamed me. I didn't care. I cooked, cleaned, and smiled when they insulted me. Every night, I listened from my room as they argued over whose son would be stronger, healthier, and more important. Brenda was getting close. I could tell by the way her stomach moved. Now, sometimes the skin rippled from one side to the other. Sometimes several separate bumps pushed outward at once. She still stroked them lovingly. My baby can't wait to come out. Neither could I, because in my last life, I had ruined everything by saving her. This time I was going to let nature take its course. And when Brenda finally gave birth, the whole family would get to meet the sons they'd been praying for. The night Brenda went into labor, the screaming started at 2:13 a.m. I woke to a crash downstairs, followed by Brenda shrieking. Kevin! Kevin, something is wrong. I sat up slowly. Then I heard Mom. My grandson. Call the hospital. I almost laughed. They had spent months celebrating every movement inside their swollen bodies. They had called every strange bump a blessing. Now the blessing was trying to get out. I slipped out of bed and walked downstairs. Brenda was on the kitchen floor, clutching her enormous stomach. Her nightgown was soaked with sweat. Kevin knelt beside her, panicking. There's blood. Mom was already dialing the hospital. Dad stood frozen near the doorway. Then Brenda screamed again. Her stomach moved. Hard. Something pushed against the skin from inside. A long, narrow shape traveled from beneath her ribs toward her hip. I covered my mouth. Oh my God, I whispered. Everyone looked at me. What? Kevin demanded. I shook my head. Nothing. I think the baby is moving. Brenda immediately looked relieved. My baby, she breathed. Then the thing inside her moved again. This time, several bumps appeared at once. 1, 2, 3. They raced across her stomach like something was crawling beneath a blanket. Dad stumbled backward. That isn't normal. Mom snapped at him. Don't scare her. The ambulance arrived 10 minutes later. 2 paramedics rushed inside with a stretcher. What happened? 5 months pregnant, Kevin said quickly. She suddenly went into labor. The paramedic frowned. 5 months? He looked at Brenda's stomach. That's extremely large for 5 months. Mom immediately became defensive. Her baby is just big. The paramedic didn't argue. They loaded Brenda onto the stretcher. Then Mom suddenly grabbed her own stomach. Wait. Everyone turned. Her face had gone pale. Something inside her abdomen shifted. Mom gasped. Dad stared. Did you feel that? Mom's hand trembled. I thought it was gas. Kevin looked terrified. Then his own stomach gave a violent twitch. He doubled over. What the hell? Dad grabbed the counter. His belly moved beneath his shirt. I stood against the wall, watching all three of them. 4 months, they had been feeding the parasites. And now the parasites were hungry. The paramedics exchanged confused looks. Are all of you sick? Nobody answered. I raised my hand. They've been eating raw seafood almost every day. Mom glared at me. Don't you dare. I shrugged. I'm just telling them what happened. The paramedic looked at the enormous pile of empty sushi containers around the kitchen. Raw fish? Kevin immediately said, it's safe. We've been eating it for months. The paramedic's expression changed. Sir, raw seafood can carry parasites. Mom slapped her hand over her stomach. Don't say that. But it was already too late. The ambulance crew insisted everyone who was symptomatic come to the hospital. Brenda was taken first. Kevin followed. Then Mom. Then Dad. I was left standing in the kitchen alone. For several seconds, I simply stared at the mess. Then I smiled. In my last life, I had dragged Brenda to that hospital screaming for someone to save her. This time, I didn't need to save anyone. I grabbed my phone and called a taxi. At the hospital, the waiting room looked like a disaster zone. Brenda was behind one curtain. Mom was behind another. Kevin was being examined. Dad was arguing with a doctor. I sat quietly in the corner. A nurse eventually approached me. Are you family? Yes. Do you know whether they have eaten anything unusual recently? I looked through the glass toward my family. Then I smiled politely. They've been eating a lot of sushi. How much? A lot. How often? Every day. The nurse's eyebrows rose. Raw? Yes. She wrote something down. Then she asked the question I'd been waiting for. Did you eat it too? I shook my head. No. They always told me the food was for the baby. The nurse looked at me strangely. Then she walked away. Half an hour later, a doctor came rushing out of Brenda's room. Who is the family member who hasn't eaten the sushi? I stood. I am. Come with me. I followed him. Brenda was lying on the bed, crying. Kevin stood beside her. An ultrasound monitor showed something moving inside her abdomen. The doctor looked exhausted. We don't know exactly what we're dealing with yet, but there are abnormal structures inside her digestive tract. Kevin stared at the screen. Is my son okay? The doctor hesitated. Mr. Carter, we need to discuss something. Kevin's face drained of color. There is no fetus. The room went dead quiet. Brenda stopped crying. What? The doctor pointed at the screen. What you're seeing isn't a baby. Kevin shook his head. No. I need to be very clear. Your wife is not pregnant. Brenda screamed. That's impossible. The doctor continued carefully. She has a severe parasitic infection. Her abdomen is massively distended, and the movements you're seeing are consistent with intestinal parasites. Kevin stared at Brenda. Then at the screen. Then back at Brenda. My son. Brenda began sobbing. No. No, that's my baby. The doctor shook his head. There is no baby. Kevin suddenly turned toward me. His eyes were full of rage. You knew. I didn't answer. He stepped toward me. You knew this would happen. I looked him directly in the eyes. I knew something was wrong. Then why didn't you tell us? I smiled. You told me I was jealous. His face twisted. You let this happen. I tilted my head. No, Kevin. I glanced toward Brenda. You did. Before he could respond, another doctor rushed into the hallway. We have another patient. Which one? Her mother. He looked at the chart. She has the same symptoms. Kevin froze. Then a nurse came running. Her father too. The family stared at one another. For the first time, nobody called it a miracle. Nobody called it a blessing. Nobody talked about sons. They had all eaten the same thing. And now they were all paying the same price. By sunrise, the doctors had confirmed the infection had spread through the entire household. Brenda had the worst case. Kevin had a severe infection. Dad's condition was nearly as bad. Mom had dozens of parasites in her digestive system. And me? Nothing. The doctor asked what I had been eating. I told him the truth. Rice, vegetables, chicken, and whatever didn't come from that sushi pile. He nodded. Then he looked toward my family. You were lucky. I almost laughed. Lucky? No. I had simply learned something in my previous life. Sometimes saving people who hate you only gives them another chance to hurt you. This time, I saved myself instead. Weeks later, Brenda's swollen stomach was gone. The parasites had been treated. Her body was weak, but she survived. Kevin survived too. So did Mom and Dad. Unfortunately for them, survival meant living with the consequences. The family home had to be professionally cleaned. Their medical bills were enormous. Kevin lost his job after missing weeks of work. Brenda's pregnancy story became a joke among the relatives who had once praised her. And Mom? She couldn't stand the smell of sushi anymore. One afternoon, she came into my room. Her face looked older than it had before. Why didn't you tell us? I looked up from my phone. I tried. She frowned. When? I smiled. Before any of this happened. She went quiet. I remembered her slap. Her insults. The door she had refused to open. The way she had watched me die. You didn't want the truth, I said. You wanted a grandson. Mom's eyes filled with tears. You're my daughter. I stared at her. You remembered that a little too late. She had no answer. She left without another word. I packed my belongings that evening. I didn't need revenge anymore. Their swollen bellies, hospital bills, and shattered dreams had done more damage than I ever could. As I stepped outside, I looked back at the house. The same house where I had died in my first life. This time, I walked away alive. And behind me, I heard Kevin yelling at Brenda from the kitchen. They were fighting again. Apparently, Brenda had just discovered that Kevin had secretly been ordering sushi for himself. I stopped at the gate. Then I laughed. Some people really never learned. I pulled my suitcase behind me and kept walking. I had already died once for this family. I wasn't going to waste my second life doing it again. 3 months after I left home, Kevin called me. I almost didn't answer. When I finally picked up, I heard him breathing heavily. Joy. Mom is sick again. I leaned against my kitchen counter. What happened? She stopped taking the medication. I frowned. Why? Kevin laughed bitterly. Because she thinks the doctors are lying. Of course she did. Mom had spent weeks insisting the parasites were harmless, claiming the doctors were exaggerating everything to scare her. Then Brenda made things worse. She started buying raw fish again. Kevin tried to stop her. She screamed that nobody was going to take away the food her baby had supposedly loved. There was no baby. There hadn't been one for months. But Brenda couldn't accept it. Within weeks, the parasites returned. This time, the doctors couldn't control the infection. Mom's body weakened first. She stopped eating. Her stomach continued swelling while the rest of her became painfully thin. Exactly like Brenda had looked when I first noticed the parasite. Dad wasn't much better. He became confused, then violently ill. Kevin tried to care for both of them while Brenda locked herself in her room, convinced something was still moving inside her. Then one night, Mom collapsed. Kevin called an ambulance. But before it arrived, she grabbed his wrist. Don't let them take my son. Kevin began crying. Mom, there is no son. Her eyes widened. You're lying. She pointed toward her stomach. I can feel him. Kevin backed away. Mom's stomach suddenly twisted beneath her nightgown. She screamed. A paramedic arrived seconds later. They rushed her to the hospital. She died before sunrise. Dad died 2 days later. His body had been too damaged by the infection. Kevin was next. He refused treatment after watching his parents die. He said the doctors had killed them. Then he locked himself inside the house with Brenda. The neighbors called the police after hearing screaming. When officers entered, they found Kevin on the floor. His stomach was horribly swollen. Brenda was sitting beside him, rocking back and forth. He's having his baby, she whispered. Kevin grabbed her arm. Get it out. Brenda screamed. I can't. Kevin began clawing at his own stomach. The police restrained him until the ambulance arrived. He died that night. Brenda survived him by 6 days. Those 6 days were the worst. She stopped speaking to everyone. She refused food. She refused medicine. She simply lay in the hospital bed staring at the ceiling. On her final night, a nurse found her whispering to herself. My baby is hungry. The nurse tried to reassure her. There is no baby, Brenda. Brenda smiled. Yes, there is. She slowly lifted her hand toward her stomach. He's waiting for me. Then she closed her eyes. Her heart stopped before morning. When I heard the news, I sat quietly for a long time. 4 people. 4 deaths. The same family who had once stood around my bedroom door and watched me die. I didn't celebrate. I didn't cry. I simply remembered. Mom had held a parasite in front of my face and called it my dead nephew. Kevin had helped hold me down. Dad had called me a murderer. Brenda had watched. Now all 4 of them were gone. The house was sold shortly afterward. I went there once to collect the last box of my belongings. The place smelled different. Empty. Cold. I walked into my old bedroom. The lock was still on the outside of the door. I touched it. For a moment, I could almost hear myself screaming from my first life. Then I turned around. I removed my hand. I didn't need to be that girl anymore. As I walked out, my phone buzzed. It was a message from the hospital. They had sent me Brenda's final medical report. I opened it. The cause of death was listed clearly. Severe parasitic infection. I stared at those words. Then I deleted the message. Some deaths didn't need revenge. They simply needed time. I closed the front door behind me and walked away. This time, nobody was waiting inside to hear me beg. And nobody was coming after me. The family that had once told me I deserved to die had finally learned exactly what I had learned in my first life. Some things you bring into your body can destroy you from the inside. And sometimes, the person who survives isn't the cruelest one. She's the one who finally chooses herself.